It's no exaggeration to say that the American farmer feeds the world. I mean, we ship agriculture products all over the world, to North America, Canada, Mexico, to Europe, to Asia, about $140 billion a year. We have made a big difference in global food shortages, eliminating them over time. American farmers have gone high-tech to do this. We're meeting the growing needs of food around the planet. Now, according to the Secretary of Agriculture, Mitzi Purdue, the American farmer is now using less resources, less inputs, less water, less fertilizer, less insecticides, less pesticides in order to produce a healthier, more wholesome crop. Even the New York Times admits that the American farmer has gone high-tech. In fact, here's an article, How High-Tech is Transforming One of the Oldest Jobs in America, Farming. From equipment automation to data collection and analysis, the digital evolution of agriculture is already a fact of life on farms across the United States. That was published as recently as September of last year. Sadly, though, most Americans think that their food comes either from a grocery store or from a restaurant. Very few people consider the source of this food. And in the age of the Chinese coronavirus, we have to worry about the impact at the source, hitting and hurting the American farmers. Unfortunately, there's so much mass ignorance, and that was displayed really sadly by a former presidential candidate and the former mayor of New York, Mike Bloomberg. Here's a clip from something he said in 2016.
And we could teach processes. I could teach anybody, even people in this room, so no offense intended, to be a farmer. It's a process. You dig a hole, you put a seed in, you put dirt on top, add water, up comes the corn. Then we had 300, you could learn that. Then you have 300 years of the industrial society. You put the piece of metal on the lathe, you turn the crank in the direction of the arrow, and you can have a job. And we created a lot of jobs. 98% of the world worked in agriculture. Today, it's 2% in the United States. Now comes the information economy. And the information economy is fundamentally different because it's built around replacing people with technology, and the skill sets that you have to learn are how to think and analyze. And that is a whole degree level different. You have to have a different skill set. You have to have a lot more gray matter.
Really? Anybody could be a farmer? And he's saying that farmers don't take gray matter? I just told you, we've actually reduced the number of farmers, reduced the amount of pesticides and everything else to produce a better crop and shipping it around the world. And this guy says it doesn't take gray matter to be a farmer? It's that level of ignorance, the fact that people think that their food just comes from a supermarket or a restaurant, that level of ignorance that is putting our food supply at risk right now. The American farmer is a hero. He's making a difference for you. He's on the front lines. And you know what? The American farmer, both he and she, by the way, are making it possible for you to eat and feeding the world. But the threat to them is real. Join me in the Economic War Room where we'll talk about the heroes of our food industry, the American farmers. You know, we have a very special guest in the Economic War Room today. It's Mitzi Purdue. She's very accomplished in so many areas. She was the past president of the American Agri-Women Association. There's 40,000 American women that are making a difference in our food supply. She's also the daughter of the founder of the Sheraton hotel chain and the wife of the late Frank Purdue, who was one of the real pioneers in the chicken industry and the food industry. So I want to welcome you, Mitzi. Welcome to the Economic War Room.
What a joy to be with you, and especially when there's such an important issue to discuss.
You know, Mitzi, we're looking at the food issue. Most people have ignored the reality. They go to their supermarket and there's still food there, but they don't realize that that food comes from somewhere and those supply chains have broken down. I want to read to you something from the 2020 UN Global Report on Food Crises and COVID-19. Basically, it talks about It has the latest figures on acute hunger and malnutrition, and it talks about 135 million people who experience food insecurity, 183 million people around the world under stressed conditions at the cusp of acute hunger, 17 million children suffering from wasting due to malnutrition, and 55 countries and territories in food crisis, according to this report. That's exacerbated by coronavirus, by global drought, and we're seeing drought in many parts of the world. And of course, there's this locust problem that you may have read about. I'm going to read from a BBC report on April 25th. The UN predicts if the outbreak is not brought under control soon, and that's a locust outbreak, the size of swarms could grow 400 times greater than they were by June, affecting mid-year harvest. This worries regional experts who point out that hunger caused by the infestation, along with lockdowns in place because of coronavirus, could have a devastating effect on poverty levels. And then they have a food security analyst who says that 25 million people are currently struggling to feed themselves, and a further 5 million would be threatened by hunger if the locust invasion is not contained. That would be the highest number of food insecure people that this region has ever seen. Mitzi, it sounds like we need the American farmer now more than ever. What's your thoughts?
Well, first of all, yes, of course, I couldn't agree with you more. But and then on top of that, although we need the American farmer, the lockdown is causing extraordinary disruption in the supply chain. And as a past president of American Agri-Women, I get to talk with a lot of people in agriculture. And here's what I learned, that the amount of food that is being destroyed because of breakdowns in the supply chain that are directly caused by the lockdown. And I'd love to get into that at some point.
Sure, absolutely. Well, you gave me 3 points to talk about. One of them, the first one, is governors, public health officials, and the media need to pay more attention to food insecurity. Can you describe that?
Yeah. I have a master's in public administration, and one of the first things that you learn in class is that most policy decisions are questions of trade-offs. And right now, it feels to me as if people are completely focusing on the very real, the very obvious one about corona deaths. Now, of course, we should care about that, but that's not the end of the story. When we're talking about trade-offs, I'd like people to consider food insecurity, because I have talked with producers, farmers, people on the ground who are seriously worried about food riots maybe half a year from now, because because of the disruptions caused by the lockdown, we are producing significantly less food, and that's going to translate into food scarcity. And so when you're weighing, I said a moment ago about the principle of policy decisions are all trade-offs. My plea to the world really is consider the effects the shutdown has on food supply. It's not just the people who die in the hospital, tragic as that is, but I think it's a real possibility if the lockdown keeps on much, much longer, that we may have more deaths from food shortages than we do from hospital deaths.
Well, you make a good point. We talk about the second order effects of things here, and that's what economists should look for, second order effects. And one of the big second order effects, when we come out from the quarantine, and quarantine is the Italian word that literally means 40 days, we're right at that 40-day period. When we exit the quarantine, we may walk to the supermarket or drive to the supermarket and see, there's actually plenty of food on the shelves, but that's not the end of the story, is it?
Not at all. Because decisions that farmers are making right now are going to affect the food supply half a year from now. And I'll give you an example. And I'm thinking of a woman I talked with just a couple of days ago. And she has the question of, does she plant sweet corn that people would eat, or does she plant dent corn, which is the kind that is dried and ends up as animal feed? It would be really nice for her economically to produce sweet corn, and we get to eat it. But she's not going to do it. And she's not going to do it because she can't be confident of the market, of the distribution, of the people who would harvest it. So instead, if she produces animal feed corn, at least it's not really critical at what moment it gets harvested. There's a lot more leeway. With sweet corn, you'd really like to harvest it within maybe 12 hours, 24 hours of when it's at its peak. With dent corn, you've got, I don't know, a matter of many days before you have to worry about when it's harvested. And most important from her point of view, you can do it with a mechanical harvester. Well, the economic signals that tell her not to produce sweet corn, people throughout the country are getting those same economic signals. And then, okay, so less sweet corn, but multiply that out by hundreds of thousands of farmers who are getting economic signals that will totally distort our food supply. And if I can give one more example.
Sure.
You're a hog producer. At this moment, because a fifth of our hog processing facilities are shut down, there's roughly a fifth of our food supply of pork that's just not going to be produced. And if you are a hog producer, right now, you're going to lose $36 on every hog that you produce. Your incentive to cut your herds back enormously is overwhelming. And I've heard hog producers, women that I talk with, say, we foresee a protein shortage by fall.
Wow. Well, people don't understand how the supply chain works, and you've just mentioned two of them. You mentioned one for animal feed, which is a different direction, and another one which is to go into the grocery store, or the third one which is to go to restaurants. And because of the efficiency, and our economy is extremely efficient, farmers have already pre-looked and decided this is where that food is going to go. And they plan for it, they invest for it, they hedge against it. They do all of these very sophisticated things, but what happens when one of those breaks down, for example, people can't eat in restaurants, then all of a sudden you may have a farmer with food ready to go somewhere and it just spoils, it's just wasted.
I can give you an example of that. A woman I talked with in Maine, she produces potatoes. And her potatoes, 40% of the potato crop in Maine goes to like restaurants. And most often it might be in the form of, for example, French fries. The potato that's just perfect for a French fry, it might be 10 ounces, 12 ounces. And it's kind of tough and it's perfect for French fries. It doesn't do well in the grocery stores, mainly because it's too big, but there's some texture issues also. Because the restaurants and the hotels and the convention centers and all these non-home uses are shut to her, she's had to plow under her crop. She's wondering whether she should plant another one. And that's food that is out of the food chain. And, if it were just her, sad, but not devastating. But what about it's true for farmers throughout the country? I've talked with people who've plowed under, their life savings in onions, plowed under. I've talked with milk producers, dairy women, who say that right now they've been cut back 20% by all their milk production because the distribution just isn't working out. And I can explain that if you'd like.
Sure. Before you do, I want to just share, have you heard from a restaurant, some of our viewers heard from restaurants, you can buy groceries there because they don't know what to do with the food that they've already ordered and they're not able to serve to customers. So, some of the great steakhouses are offering, prime dry-aged beef if you like that, or wet-aged beef. You can get, to cook at home, you can get things that you've never gotten, but that is a temporary, tiny stopgap of a massive problem. We have food going the wrong direction because of an efficient economy, and it means food that's going to be wasted. So tell us that other example, Mitzi.
Okay, you mentioned efficient supply chain, but if we had 2 years to adjust to the lockdown, it would all be fine. But it happened like almost overnight. And I'll give you the example from my dairy friend. She says that she produces milk, which is highly perishable. Within 48 hours, if it's not processed and distributed, it's not saleable. Well, she produces those little pint-sized things that you use in like schools. Now you would think, why can't she just divert it into the gallon size that the supermarkets want? Well, she tells me that the producers of the little of the gallon-sized ones, they're already running 27.4. They can't readjust to increasing the supply. Well, so what about the producers of the pint-sized ones? The machines come from China. They can't, if they had a year to adjust, they could do it easy peasy, but they don't. And so she ends up watching her milk go down the drain, and it makes her heart sick. She jokes, we shouldn't cry over spilt milk, but when you're watching your life savings go down the drain, and when you know that you exist to feed people and you can't do it, it's misery.
Absolutely misery. And every additional day of this quarantine lockdown worsens the problem, doesn't it?
That's my fear, because I think at this point we can recover, and I'm not foreseeing food shortages or serious desperate ones, but you keep the lockdown going long enough and you keep the restaurants closed and the hotels closed and the travel industry closed, I see it getting worse day by day, and the consequences, I'm not saying that I know this is true, but I can guarantee you that there are people talking about it. Food riots and civil disorder because of the amount of food destruction that's happening because of the lockdown.
Well, you're absolutely right. As an economist, that's something you study. One of the big precursors to riot is food inflation or food shortages. And that's what lends to riots. And there's something called the butterfly effect. And the butterfly, a butterfly flaps its wings and there's a tornado caused in another part of the world or something like that. It's a great science fiction novel introduced that concept, but Ray Bradbury, but it's got a lot of truth. And so we keep the lockdown one more day, keep people in their homes one more day in New York, hoping we can save, and I do hope we can save an 85-year-old individual who doesn't get coronavirus, doesn't go on a ventilator, doesn't die. But it has second order effects. What if that extra day of lockdown so alters our food supply that, in America, we won't have as much starvation as they will in poor countries, but what if 1,000 people die in an impoverished nation? I want to look here's a headline from USA Today about drought. The headline says, mega drought emerging in western U.S. might be worse than any in 1,200 years. And it's not just in the United States they're seeing drought, it's around the world. How does a drought impact agriculture?
We had a lot of resilience in the system up until COVID-19. COVID-19 is erasing our resilience. I'm actually scared agreeing with the UN person that you quoted earlier. I'm afraid this is really going to translate into starvation on a biblical level. I wish the people who are deciding about when to release their states from lockdowns and shutdowns or quarantine in place, wish they'd consider, as you say, the second order effects. Take, for example, Japan. 37% of their food is produced in Japan. They're depending on all the rest from imports. What if we can't provide those imports and we're a major exporter to Japan? The decisions that we make right now are going to affect it's
the rest of the world.
Words. The amount of suffering that if we get this wrong that will be caused is astonishing.
And I don't think policymakers are taking that into account as they should. And I also don't think that they're taking into account all of the impacts, particularly on the American farmer. Here's another problem. Foreigners buying up American farmland now own the acreage equivalent to the state of Tennessee with the profits shipped overseas. What does that do when you have foreign ownership? Here I'll read American Action News. Foreigners buying up American farmland with profits shipped overseas. Foreign ownership of our most fertile soil has skyrocketed to 27.3 million acres, larger than the state of Tennessee. It's likely that even more American land will end up in foreign hands, especially in states with no restrictions on ownership. With the median age of U.S. farmers at 55, many face retirement with no prospect of family members willing to take over. The National Young Farmers Coalition anticipates that 2/3 of the nation's farmland will change hands in the next few decades. We talk about economic warfare. One of the ways you could do it is to buy up the American farmland and just take it out of production. I see that as a threat to the American farmer. What do you think?
I'm with you on that. This is economic warfare, and I think we better start defending ourselves pretty soon. If it were up to me, well, I'm glad it's not up to me, but if it were up to me, I would say end foreign buying of something that's a national security issue.
It is a national security issue. And, keeping American farmers in business was a big part of President Trump's trade deal with China. He said that he arranged for China to buy $200 billion worth of energy and agricultural products from us over time, because we need an American domestic energy industry and we need an American farm industry. That was a huge deal. It was a linchpin of the trade deal that he signed. But according to Foreign Policy magazine, China can invoke a clause in the agreement that allows for fresh trade consultations between the two countries in the event of a natural disaster or other unforeseeable event like a pandemic. So they may have an out on this. So that's a third hit on the farmers, is they were pretty much guaranteed some foreign sales that are being taken away. And now we have the problem of planting season. You've already alluded to it, but we don't know if farmers are going to plant the right crops for what's going to be needed. How can they know what's going to be needed when harvest time comes?
Well, again, a conversation, actually, I'm going to summarize several conversations I've had recently. But supposing you're a grain, let's say you grow corn. The market signals you're getting are, in the case of corn, there are some states where 90% of the corn goes for animal feed or for ethanol. Well, the price of ethanol has just dropped. Yeah. I mean, the market for that is how about gone with the low oil prices? And I'm exaggerating, not gone, but how about just dropped through the cellar?
Yeah.
And then the animal feed, if people are producing less chickens, there's a lot of chicken companies are breaking the eggs so that they're not going to grow into chickens. There's a lot of euthanizing of the hogs. And I'm not sure what's happening with beef cattle, but the market for corn is just decimated. So your incentive, if you know you're going to lose money planting a crop, why would you plant the crop? And some people, this is the economic decisions that weigh on them. I plant this crop, I'm going to lose money. I'm not going to be able to pay for the fertilizer or the harvesting. Those economic signals are just everywhere. And how it's going to play out, I think, is going to be hugely influenced by how long the shutdown lasts.
Well, and the Ag Secretary, Mitzi Purdue, is aware of some of this, but we need the American people to be aware of it because it's not even thought of. It's not even considered. Here's North Dakota State University crop economist said, in my view, for China to meet the dollar amounts for the increase in agriculture purchases, it's still possible, but it's getting more difficult as time goes by. But it's still possible. What we're talking about is as the shutdown continues, as America stays locked in our homes, eating fine because of the food that was planted last year, and eating well, at least for most of us, as we're facing that, we're looking down the road and we're seeing potential famine in certain parts of the world. And the American farmer will not have the bullets or the equipment or the things necessary to forestall the famine as we've done in the past. And you mentioned earlier food shortages and job losses. Here's a quote, LA Times, food shortages and job losses, coronavirus fuels social and political unrest around the world. The threat of social and political unrest is rising as the coronavirus crisis fuels discontent amid food shortages, job losses, and lockdowns. Again, it's the butterfly effect. And this is something that was predicted by George Soros. Yes, that George Soros. In 2012, Soros said, warning that violence on the streets was inevitable unless the problems of unemployment and debt were addressed. Soros warned this could lead to the erosion of civil liberties and installation of a police state. We felt a little bit of that, a tiny bit of police state when they're telling you, stay in your homes, you can't get out of your cars at a certain place, you can't be in a park at a certain place. He said, asked about the likelihood of riots in the U.S., yes, yes, yes. It will be an excuse for cracking down and using strong-arm tactics to maintain law and order, which, carried to an extreme, could bring about a repressive political system, a society where individual liberty is much more constrained. George Soros warned, that George Soros, that we might have riots, and those riots would be precipitated by a food crisis, and we're facing that. So, Mitzi, how do we solve this? What's your best idea for supporting the American farmer?
My best idea is for everybody who's making decisions on how long the shutdown lasts, take into account the possibility, how about the real possibility of not just food insecurity, but civil unrest. The farmers have every economic signal right now to plant less, and they're destroying, I think, more amounts of food than we can easily grasp. And not because they want to, but because the supply system has broken down, and the supply system is broken down because of the shutdown. So get the restaurants up and running again, get the hotels, get the convention centers. And actually, I don't want to say you must, but I do want to say please take into account these second order effects, because I think they may cost far more lives and far more liberty than you're taking into account right now.
Well, we're going to get the message out. That's the purpose of the Economic War Room. What we do is we take important issues, we explain them to the American people, and then we take them to the policymakers, and we're going to give them that very direct message. If we continue on, oh yeah, we think we might save a life here or there. You know, there's a lot of question about the models that led us into this lockdown, and a lot of question about what the best strategy is, but there is no question that if the American farmer doesn't have leadership saying, hey, we need you planning, we're going to open restaurants, we're going to provide food in grocery stores, we're going to feed the world, you're our heroes, you can make a difference for America, so we're going to open the economy, get to work. That's what we need to say. That's a message. Now, we've built a tool, and I want to share it with you. It's a tool created by Navigo and my friend Benjamin Newsma, where we can look on a county-by-county basis to see where we can open almost immediately.
Okay, Mitzi, you go to restartnow.io, and when you find on the page, you'll see Find Your Location, and we're going to select Maryland because Maryland is your state. And what this is going to show us is a table comparing between restarting today, the 29th of April, or restarting in 30 days. If we end the shutdown now, our dollars lost will be $17 billion for Maryland versus $29 billion if we shut down or restart 30 days from now. So, I mean, this is an amazing savings. So I'm going to click Turn on the Economy, and you can see what it does. It flattens the curve. It saves jobs. $12 billion in dollars, 224,000 jobs, and 85 fewer suicides net if we open Maryland now. And we need to do it on a county-by-county basis. So we're going to scroll down and look at the low, medium, and high-risk counties. Baltimore City, for example, you can see here it's a higher-risk county. It's got a big economic impact, but it is higher risk, and therefore that's one you might not open first. But you can go down and find Montgomery County, which is a low-risk county. And you can see the savings would be substantial for Montgomery County, both in lives and in dollars. This is the tool. It's at restartnow.io.
So what we see from this tool is save lives by opening now, save lives, save the economy, and over time save even more lives because we provide food to the world.
I'm in love with a high-tech solution because it's knowledge that's going to save us. Because I don't want to open a county that's going to be devastated by lots of coronavirus cases. But on the other hand, I don't want to keep shut down one that wouldn't be impacted. And it really caught my eye, the number of suicides that would be saved. And we know that there's suicides associated with the lockdown.
No question. So we're going to get that message out. Open the economy now for the farmers, for our food supply, for the people who are locked in their homes and getting into desperate situations. Open it now, but do it smartly. Do it on a county-by-county basis.
Yes.
Now, we have a lot of investors that watch our program, Mitzi, and we don't give investment advice. We never do. But if you have any thoughts, what could an investor do to help the American farmer?
Well, the one thing that I'm familiar with is investing in actual land rather than the stock market. And when my father died, and we're talking 1968, I came into an inheritance from the hotel business. And back then, what seemed to me logical turned out to be what I would advise today, which is agricultural land that's producing is how about one of the best possible investments. But you'll lose your shirt unless you go about it smartly. And I'll tell you what I did because I had this inheritance from the hotel company. I spent 4 years taking courses in agronomy, rural appraisal, agricultural accounting. I made it my business to meet and get to know and like all the county extension people in my area. I probably examined 50 different farms and studied them enough to almost write a doctoral thesis about each one before I bought the first one. And I'll tell you what the result of that has been. The money that was in the stock market that in a trust versus what I could invest in my own, farmland has outperformed it by 200 times.
Wow.
So productive agricultural land, and I want to advise that in particular because I want our American investors to be buying that land rather than people from other countries.
No, that's a great idea. And your point is well taken. It requires advice. You came and educated yourself on how to do it. The average person doesn't have time for that. That's why they need advisors, and that's why their advisors need training. And so that's part of what the NSIC Institute, National Security Investment Consultant Institute, does is a group of trained advisors. In the Economic War Room, we're going to be working with Liberty University, and we're going to be training advisors that can then enter the NSIC Institute. And one of the curriculum courses they need is they need to understand investing in farmland. And so we'll make sure that that's part of the curriculum. Mitzi,
I want to lecture at that. Give me the opportunity.
Absolutely. We would love to have you as part of our training in that for advisors. Now, we talked about the bad, and that's the problem we face. And we talked about some of the good things we can do is open the economy now, invest in farmland, and so forth. Let's talk about the beautiful, because we like to do the opposite of Clint Eastwood. He has the good, the bad, the ugly. We do the bad, the good, the beautiful. And you've written a book with Mark Victor Hansen. He's world famous. He's the co-author of Chicken Soup for the Soul. And the title of your book is How to Be Up in Down Times, 40 Tips. And so would you share a story from one of those 40 tips with us?
I would absolutely love to. And by the way, probably the greatest honor of my life is co-authoring a book with Mark Victor Hansen. Wow. And let me tell people ahead of time that he's going to give this book away for the next few weeks or until it's available on Amazon. So we're going to give you an address to write to. But like one tip from it, and the book is all about being upbeat during really down times. There's one of the tips is, and it has to do with Mother Teresa and Napoleon. Okay. Napoleon had all the glamour, the riches, the status, the money. He ruled like one of the largest empires that's ever existed. At the end of his days, writing in exile, he said, I can't count 5 happy days in my entire life. Then take the contrast from that, and I'm going to draw a conclusion. Mother Teresa had a vow of poverty. The possessions that she had included 3 cotton saris and the sandals on her feet. Those are all the material possessions that woman owned. And yet, at the end of her days, she also looked back on her life, and instead of Napoleon's, I can't count 5 happy days, Mother Teresa said, my life has been a feast of unending joy. Now, what's the lesson to take from those two? Napoleon was a taker. Everything he got, whether it was the jewels or the women or the countries, he grasped, he stole, he was a taker. Mother Teresa devoted her life to giving. And her life was joyful. Napoleon's was miserable. And so my tip of the 40 tips that we give in this is be a giver, not a taker.
That's a great tip, Mitzi. That's tremendous. And we're going to make that book available. The authors are making it available. We'll put how to get it, the address to write to get it, in the economic battle plan that we produced for this episode. Now, one of the key things we learned from Mitzi is just how important the agriculture industry truly is to America and also to the world. It's important now more than ever. Too often we take our food supply for granted, and I'm afraid that's happening right now because you can pick up the phone, call Domino's, and you get a pizza. You think that there's grocery stores there, you either go there or you have them delivered. You're more worried about toilet paper than you are whether you're going to have ground beef or chicken or even grains. But that is a problem that's going to be coming down the line because the things you're eating today were produced months ago and sent into the supply chain. Now, we need to respect and appreciate the American farmer. One of my heroes, a real pioneer in this business of sharing and communicating with the American people, was the great Paul Harvey. And Paul Harvey had a tribute to the farmer. I want you to see it.
And on the 8th day, God looked down on his planned paradise and said, I need a caretaker. So God made a farmer. God said, I need somebody willing to get up before dawn, milk cows, work all day in the fields, milk cows again, eat supper, then go to town and stay past midnight at a meeting of the school board. So God made a farmer. I need somebody with arms strong enough to wrestle a calf and yet gentle enough to deliver his own grandchild. Somebody to call hogs, tame cantankerous machinery, come home hungry, have to wait lunch until his wife's done feeding visiting ladies, then tell the ladies to be sure and come back real soon, and mean it. So God made a farmer. God said, I need somebody willing to sit up all night with a newborn colt and watch it die, then dry his eyes and say, maybe next year. I need somebody who can shape an axe handle from a persimmon sprout, shoe a horse with a hunk of car tire, who can make harness out of hay wire, feed sacks, and shoe scraps, who planting time and harvest season will finish his 40-hour week by Tuesday noon, and then painin' from tractor back put in another 72 hours. So God made a farmer. God had to have somebody willing to ride the ruts at double speed to get the hay in ahead of the rain clouds and yet stop in midfield and race to help when he sees the first smoke from a neighbor's place. So God made a farmer. God said, I need somebody strong enough to clear trees and heave bales, yet gentle enough to yean lambs and wean pigs and tend the pink-combed pullets, who will stop his mower for an hour to splint the broken leg of a meadowlark. It had to be somebody who'd plow deep and straight and not cut corners, somebody to seed, weed, feed, breed, and rake and disc and plow and plant and tie the fleece and strain the milk and replenish the self-feeder and finish a hard week's work with a 5-mile drive to church. Somebody who'd bail a family together with the soft, strong bonds of sharing, who would laugh and then sigh and then reply with smiling eyes when his son says that he wants to spend his life doing what Dad does. So God made a farmer.
God made the farmer. He's done his part. What can you do to help the American farmer? The first thing I'm going to suggest is that we all need to pray. We talk about 2 Chronicles 7:14 a lot, but go up one verse, and I'm going to read to you from 2 Chronicles 7:13. It addresses the three big problems that we've talked about: drought, locusts, and plague, like the coronavirus. Here, I'll read it. When I shut up heaven and there is no rain, or command the locusts to devour the land, or send pestilence among my people, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then I will hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and heal their land. So we need to pray, and we need to pray for the American farmer. Second, we need to make sure elected politicians and all of our policymakers understand the importance of the American ag industry. Those people on the Green New Deal, those supporters, they want to make major changes to your diet. They want to tell you what you can eat, how much, whether or not you can eat meat or not, whether you can drink a 32-ounce soda or a 16-ounce soda. They really have no idea of how we get our food. Think about the Mike Bloomberg example where he said, it takes no great matter. I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor, you're wrong. Third, you need to weaponize your money. You need to find a way to invest in the things that will help bring America to success and prosperity. We see foreign nations, they're weaponizing their money against us. We need to weaponize our money. And one of the ways you might look is you might look at farmland, and you'll need advice for that. So again, look for an advisor that's a member of the NSIC Institute. And we're going to be training them with Liberty University, and that's coming up. Now, we're going to recap this entire episode and put all of the background. We'll introduce you to Mitzi and her background and how you can get a copy of her forthcoming book for free. You can get your free battle plan at economicwarroom.com. Now, I need to say thank you, Mitzi. It's a great pleasure having you here with us in the Economic War Room.
It was a complete joy being with you, and I love the chance to tell my message.
Okay, for viewers, don't forget, our regularly scheduled Blaze TV episode will come out tomorrow. It comes out on Thursday, and this one is important. This one, equally important to the farmer, is the American energy industry. Without food and without energy, we've got a lot of problems. And we've already covered water with Lieutenant General Stephen Quast in the last episode. So these are the critical things: water, food, and energy. And there's an economic war being waged against each of them. Remember, what we see as a marketplace, our enemies view as a battle space. This is Kevin Freeman from the Economic War Room.